Hello, AP Psych students. Welcome to Lecture 1 of Unit 9. We're going to be discussing developmental psychology. So, for this assignment, as you watch this video, you will be taking notes and writing down key takeaways and questions that you'll be putting on your Lecture 1 response assignment, right, as you see there in the yellow on this slide. Lecture 1 response assignment doc. You'll find that in PSL. You need to just make a Google Doc, and on it you're going to have 3 key takeaways, a question, and a response to someone else's question. Okay, so in order to do that, you're going to actually need to write your questions and your responses on this YouTube video. Okay, and then I want you to go ahead, copy and paste that, and then put that in the Google Doc as well with your key takeaways. You don't need to write the key takeaways on the YouTube video. You just put that on your Google Doc, and then copy the other things over. You will also be required to do these active learning slides. So I'm going to ask you some questions. In this case, it's more of an activity, and you're going to be interviewing a parent or an adult that has known you for an extended period of time, and you're going to ask them these questions and record their responses to these questions, and then kind of reflect on the responses that they gave you and how you see the difference and similarities of your own personal character throughout the development of your childhood and adolescence. Okay, so that's kind of the expectation for this assignment, this Lecture 1 response assignment. So you can pause it, replay what I just said if you didn't catch that, but you will need to turn this assignment in on PSL. Okay. All right. So, what is developmental psychology? It is the study of physical, cognitive, and social changes throughout the human lifespan. All right. So we're looking at human development from 3 different lenses: physically, cognitively, and socially. The 3 major arguments in developmental psychology that we're going to discuss are nature and nurture, continuity and stages, and stability and change. And we're going to kind of see how these 3 different views and perspectives on psychology kind of intertwine and connect throughout the entire unit and understanding of this field of study of human development. Okay, so nature versus nurture. We have genetically programmed processes, right, that occur over time through this role of maturation and experience that influences our behavior and our development. We have nurture, which, if we look back, many years before John Locke, came up with this philosophy of this sense of nurture, and how nurture is what shapes us, right? Tabula rasa, or blank state, in which our personal experiences shape our learning throughout time. We see, though, that John Locke's view of developmental psychology and human development isn't necessarily the most accurate. There are definitely genetic predispositions and things that we do learn through nature. So we're not born completely blank. Then we have continuity. Continuity, the approach that argues that development is continuous, that it's a slow process in which we learn things gradually. There's no set age for these skills that we learn. So, like the example your book gives is looking at it like in a sense of an escalator, right, rather than a staircase, which discontinuity is more about these specific set concrete stages in which development is set on how we develop physically, socially, and cognitively. And the major theorists that are responsible for this would be Kohlberg, Erikson, and Jean Piaget, which is really the skeleton of this unit. We're going to be talking about those 3 individuals a lot today, particularly Jean Piaget and his theory of cognitive development. Okay, lastly, we have stability versus change. Which of our traits persist throughout our lifetime? How do we change as we age? At what point at what point in our life do certain behaviors affect our adulthood from birth, right? So, this could be the case in the scenario of asking a question like, do children with large smiles, wide smiles, end up being the ones that have the happiest marriages, right? There might be some correlations to that, okay? But the reality is we can't entirely base our understanding of human character and human development through this idea of stability, that because you had a wide smile when you were 3 years old, you're now going to have a terrible marriage when you're 30 years old. So stability gives us a sense of set understandings of stability, right? And then we understand change gives us a sense of hope, as we know that certain aspects in our lives do change and develop over time. And next we have maturation. We're looking at the development of our body physically, and so we're going to talk specifically about maturation and motor development. All right, so maturation is it's the genes in our bodies, it's the biological growth processes that enable us to change in terms of our behavior and our physical abilities and our cognitive abilities, how we experience the world. Okay, so yes, while firsthand experience does somewhat help aid and shape us, maturation is incredibly important for our physical, cognitive, and social abilities. So, for instance, in this case, we're looking at motor development. You see usually babies, right, by 6 months, they're able to sit upright, unsupported. Okay, crawling between 8 to 9 months. Beginning of walking, that motion, around 11 to 12 months. And then walking independently between 13 to 15 months. So this is the maturation of motor development. Also things like babbling, right, to speaking. Speaking is going to eventually happen during the pre-operational stage. Next, we have maturation of infant memory. So if we're looking at cognitive development, we see that by about age 2, the brain is about 75% of its adult size. So that's grows a lot there between birth and age of 2. In the earliest age, our conscious memories don't really become very concrete until after about 3.5 to 4 years old. So this is called infantile amnesia, when we typically can't remember details of our lives before the age 3.5. And we may have some very, very broken memories in our unconscious mind due to the nervous system. So this could be things like sounds from different languages that you learned when you were an infant that your mom spoke around the house, and you might be able to consciously remember them, or unconsciously I should say, remember like the pronunciation or the sound of that language, but you don't really know the meaning of it. Okay, it's just kind of familiar. Or it could be a traumatic experience you went through, possibly at age 2. You could have went through a house fire, and you may not necessarily have detailed memory of that event, visual images, but when you smell smoke, you may just have this emotional response like fear, and that was your nervous system that put that memory into your unconscious. But generally we don't have any memory of our lives before 3.5 years old. Okay, and then physical development of the brain, we can see here at birth to 15 months, there's a huge change of how this brain of a child develops and matures into processing things like language, into processing things like motor skills, memory. Okay, and these are all psychological and biological developments that occur. So infants brain looks like this at birth, and they say that when we're born we have about 100 billion neurons at our birth. Now, while we still have all those neurons, those dendrites and those networks, those neural networks haven't really had a lot of time to connect and learn, right, as we studied in biological psych. And those dendrites grow as we learn, as we develop skills, as we learn how to speak, as we learn how to walk, as we use our muscles and practice new things and see new things. So by the age 15, by about age 2, they say these neurons have about 1,500 synapses per day, whereas when we're born at birth, we only have about 2,500 synapses per day, so per neuron. Still a lot of synapses, but you can do the math there. That's dramatic. If you have 100 billion neurons and it goes from 2,500 to 15,000 synapses per day, you're learning so much, and your brain is getting larger and developing very quickly in just those 2 years. Okay, now we're going to go into Jean Piaget. Okay, so Piaget's theory of cognitive development has 4 specific stages in which it's laid out. Okay, you've got between birth to 2 years. This is sensory motor. And developmental phenomenon here is object permanence and stranger anxiety. Next you have between 2 to 7. This is pre-operational. And some key phenomenon here that we notice is pretend play begins to develop, egocentrism, and you see major development in terms of language. And then from ages between 7 to 11, you see the concrete operational stage, in which now the phenomenon of being able to solve problems of conservation and mathematical transformations is seen. And then lastly, we have adult, about 12 through adulthood. Okay, this is known as formal operational. Key phenomenon, you're able to think more logically, and you become more mature in abstract moral reasoning. So the first phase of Piaget's theory of cognitive development is sensory motor stage. All right, this takes place again between birth to about 2 years of age. In this stage, babies take in the world by looking, hearing, and touching. Right, children at this age are very curious, and they're fun to watch in this stage because they're just learning so much, and they're looking at the world around them, and it's just so new. Everything is so new. And so before about 6 months of age, they lack something, and it's this key milestone here, object permanence. Object permanence is just the awareness that things continue to exist even when they're not perceived or in sight. Right? So as they're learning their senses, their 5 senses, they don't realize that, oh, when I cover my face, I'm still there. But they don't understand that, right? So that's why peekaboo is so funny with babies at this age, because it's so fun to them. They don't understand. They don't have object permanence. So when you cover your face in peekaboo, that game, they think you disappeared. And it's hilarious when you just, boom, you're right back in front of them again, right? It's also the same thing with, like, if you use something, right, to cover an item, or a toy that they're playing with, and then it's just gone, and then they pick up the blanket and they see their toy and they look at you and they smile and they laugh. It's because they don't understand how it got there. How did it just appear again? So by about age 8 months, they do develop object permanence, and object permanence in that game of peekaboo isn't really fun anymore. Okay, next we have stranger anxiety. This is another key milestone that we see around 8 to 13 months in which it peaks. So stranger anxiety is just when children are very anxious when mommy is not in the room and they're left with a stranger. Okay, if a child is crying because it's the first time you've held them, and they're between these months, 8 to 13. Don't get offended. It's not that you're bad with kids. It's not that you're scary. At this age in development, that child has a difficult time developing schemas for familiar faces that are safe, and it just the child cannot assimilate as quickly as us. Who is safe and who is with who? We can't categorize and assimilate and understand fully that concept of who is safe and who is a friend of mommy and who can hold me. So when a child cries because it's the first time you're holding them and they're between these ages, it's just a normal stage that babies go through. It's called stranger anxiety.